You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Hey, welcome world, or at least that subset of it, which is inclined to tune in to go upstream with us today. Jack Cashill and
Lloyd Edge. How are you, Jack?
not too bad. And where is our countercultural stream taking us today?
Well, you know, I was kind of thinking about how much. One of the things that really kind of bugs me that I hear a lot is this phrase, "it takes a village."
Right.
It just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Can't stand that.
Quick digression. I interviewed Hillary Clinton about that book.
You did?
Yes, I did. This is when I was back at KMBC. I was doing daily radio, right? Talk radio. And she was our guest via radio, via airwaves, of course. And the station manager hovered over me every second she was on the air.
Imagine.
I was not to ask about cattle futures or Vince Foster or Whitewater.
I would imagine he wasn't the only one hovering over you. Probably about 18 guys with little earphones.
All right. It was not.
Who is this guy?
It wasn't exactly free form. Tell me about it. I know it bugs me too, but you can
Well, I just, growing up post-Korean War era,
Right.
50s and 60s as a small child. I'm talking about when we were really small kids.
Right.
And you were 8 years ahead.
And you were
of
a
me.
little smaller than I was.
Yeah.
Right.
But I grew up in a small suburban town in Kansas City
Right.
called Fairway.
Yeah.
And it was an older suburb and nothing fancy, just middle class.
Right.
But it was Mayberry,
Uh-huh.
It was Leave It to Beaver's neighborhood. But and people who've grown up after that really have no idea of the intimacy of connection that we had to our neighbors, to our stores, our retailers, our shops,
Right.
The service providers, everybody from the egg man to the Fuller brush man. I mean, you knew everybody.
Yeah, and just to universalize that experience, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which today is the poster child for urban dysfunction. But I grew up in a neighborhood that was exactly like that. Mm-hmm. There was almost a perfectly communal, harmonious. It was a neighborhood in which it was in its own way Mayberry. Mm-hmm. It was,
And I think that was you
until the mid '60s, and then it became it became
mayhem.
Mayhem, right?
But I think this was really America.
Yeah,
and all through it, and so just to look at some of these things culturally, that there were good and bad attributes.
Yeah.
But overall, the thing that I want to address is that people have no idea what it was like, and to maybe paint a little bit of a picture of that. And it's going to sound a little bizarre that in my neighborhood as a kid, there weren't divorces. People,
No.
there was so much shame attached to that.
right.
How could a man leave his family and not provide and defend? And
Exactly.
How could
Right.
Okay, because the connection people don't get, that we didn't have external, proxy kind of relationships. We were right there.
There's nothing virtual about our
Nothing
relationships.
virtual. There was one car
Yeah.
that every family had. Maybe
Right.
one or two of them had two cars,
Yeah,
but they
that's
were
right.
rich. And,
One TV.
one TV, black and white. You didn't have air conditioning. One guy on the next block, his parents had a Curtis Mathis cooler in the kitchen.
Right.
And man, I mean, when we were outside playing, we'd go over there and stand in front of that damn thing, and that was heaven.
We had a guy down the street with a color TV, and we used to hide in the bushes to watch it through the window.
But all these technological advances, which we can get into in a few minutes,
Yeah.
they help separate everybody.
Right.
They closed, the air conditioning, closed the houses up. People weren't on their porches anymore. People weren't outside as
right.
often. I mean, that was a monumental difference.
It was. And, just to validate your point about divorce, I have a book coming out in not too distant future.
Again?
Yeah, but this is my capstone book. It's the career book. It's a large part memoir, but it also addresses larger social issues. And it's called, the working title of the book is Untenable. And the subtitle is The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities. And as part of the research, and I was very fortunate in this, and you can look this up if you wanted to about your own neighborhood, is that every 72 years, the U.S. Census Department, for whatever reason, waits 72 years before releasing a census. And so...
Well, that sounds like Pfizer. That sounds like JFK.
Right, but they're not. Well, it makes me wonder. Well, partly because they don't want you to know what life was like 72 years ago. So I went back to my block on which I grew up for the 1950 census. I didn't move to that block until 1953, but it didn't change much in those 3 years. 83 is a working class neighborhood, not middle class like Fairway, pure working class. The census lists the occupation. And short of like lumberjack and deep sea fishermen, there was not an occupation unlisted among the 81 males with jobs on that block. 83 families. You know how many had a male head of household?
The only ones that didn't were the dead ones, so I would say 80.
81. And 2 widows, probably war widows.
Right.
81 out of 83 families on a working class block, a block that today probably has 0 male heads of household. These are married male heads of household. 81 out of 83. That's the difference that a generation makes in terms of the raising of a village, taking of a community and changing.
And that was the
something
same in Fairway.
Yeah.
And the only ladies who were living alone were widows.
Right.
And I don't think there was one on my block, but there were a couple widowers.
Yeah. Being suburbs, they probably, killed their wives and then moved on to.
No, that didn't happen till later.
Later, 60s and 70s.
This is 1960.
Until Dateline NBC came on and they needed show material.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but you knew everyone.
Right.
Now, I'm talking about when I was just a 5-year-old kid, a 4 or 5-year-old kid, you had reign of the entire block.
Right.
And there was a phenomenon also called block dogs. I don't know if you remember this, but
I don't know that term.
There were no leash laws.
Huh.
And so instead of everyone having 2 or 3 dogs and cats and all that,
Right.
a couple of the people on the block owned dogs.
Yeah.
Well, the dogs could run loose.
Right.
And they became sort of block dogs, communal property. So my dog was an English setter named Joe who lived a block and a half away, but he'd come see me and I'd hang out with Joe. A great deal when you think about it.
Now, did you name him Joe, or was that
No,
his?
that was his name. It was on his tag.
Okay. I thought he introduced himself. Hey, my name's Joe. Who are you? Loy? What kind of name is that? What kind of name is that, Loy? I don't know.
Well, Joe, and so everybody didn't have to have dogs.
Right.
Your kid has all the dog he needed,
Yeah, right, sure, right.
He had the dog, and then the dog left, and you didn't have to worry about it. But I knew, not only did I know the neighbors on the block and the other blocks around,
Sure.
I knew everything about them. I knew their whole story. I knew the kids' names. I knew what their parents' names were in a lot of cases. I would walk into any one of these houses, and Mrs. Meals next door would say...
And what did you call Mrs., by the way?
Mrs. Meals.
You called everyone Mr. and Mrs.
Mr. and Mrs., of
right?
course.
Yeah.
And they'd say, come on in.
Right.
And Roy's toys are upstairs in his room. You know, Roy was off into college, and I'd go in there and I'd pull out his games and toys and play with him, and we'd make cookies. And this was just one neighbor, but they were all like that.
Yeah, right.
Every one of them. One of them made cookies, and I'd go out and kick around in the garden, and the ladies would all be out, hanging the laundry.
Right.
Everything was a communal experience.
Right. Hanging the laundry at that time was the equivalent of a chat room, you know?
Yes.
You didn't have a virtual communication.
No.
Like one lady would go out and hang her laundry, because women hung laundry then.
Yes, they did.
I've never seen a male.
And kids ran into it and let
under
the
it
sheet hit them and
they got yelled at.
Over.
But then you almost inevitably, talk to the woman on the other side of the fence or whatever who's hanging out her laundry.
And everybody sees those posts in the back, and they probably don't even know what they probably think of some kind of radio antenna now.
Right.
Those had,
clotheslines, yeah.
Clotheslines.
The clothespins,
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say in my family, so powerful a communication tool was the clothesline that we moved into our house in 1954 when I was about 6. And there were only a few homeowners in our block. Virtually everyone lived in apartments. We were almost unique in that regard. But living next to us was an older couple. And my mother got to hanging out clothes and talking to the woman across the clothesline. And they start exchanging information. And the neighbor would say, "Oh, my daughter Ellen is, she's graduating from college next year, and she's, strong Catholic, and blah blah blah." And then my mother would say, "Oh, my brother Andy is." These are the unicorns in our world. Graduating from college, is graduating from college next year too. Maybe we can get Andy to meet Ellen, right? Well, 7 children later, and Ellen is my aunt.
Wow.
And and that started literally over a clothesline.
Well, we didn't have those kind of things going on, but we kind of kept it above board. We weren't hooking.
This is. I mean, these were married couple, with 7 legitimate children here.
I understand. I understand, but still, that.
But your point is well made. It was the chat room of the day. You didn't need Instagram because you had instant communication with real human beings over things like a clothesline.
And the old ladies that were the grandma,
right,
often lived at the house.
Often
there were
did.
Several of those. They were our babysitters.
They were the babysitters, and also, adults of that age felt the responsibility for their parents. They didn't just ship them off to a nursing home.
No.
They took them into the house.
And someone was always in those houses.
Right.
So this whole phenomenon of, everybody sticking a alarm system sign in their yard, or people freaking out because some kids were running across their lawn. We ran across every lawn.
Right.
We jumped over fences.
Right.
We played war.
Yeah.
That was about the only toys we had. Was we'd get a gun.
You just need a stick. Right?
And we played war,
right.
know. But because there was somebody in the house watching it, and the only people that really, the strangers that came around, it was the insurance man coming around to collect the money.
Sure, right.
Or it was the egg man, or it was the milkman, or the bread man,
collect, right.
or the Fuller brush man,
right.
Or people don't realize
the vacuum cleaner sales
that it's kind of gone full circle. We
right.
had our Amazon was a bunch of other people that would come and deliver things to your door, but
sure.
mainly that was because people were one-car families, and usually it was Dad who was at work.
Takes the car.
Now there were a couple of
right.
women who worked in our neighborhood. There was a registered nurse next door, and teachers, mainly Sunday school teachers and things like that. Women would take those kind of roles.
Right. In fact, on my block, I checked about 1/3 of the households had a working mother,
mm-hmm.
a working female, but 2/3 did not. Even though, the income was the kind of income you make as a butcher, a baker, candlestick maker, carpenter, a casket maker. These are just some of the professions on the block. Rubber molder, things that I never even heard of, or welders. And And I don't think there was a single college graduate on the block, which made Ellen, my future aunt, such a an unusual match for my equally unusual uncle. So
Well, our block had every type of
class yeah.
going on.
Right.
It's one block.
Yeah.
Gentleman next door, they were highly educated, both of them. He
Right.
was a partner at Burns and McDonald. There were people, and like I said, the lady was a registered nurse next door. Not sure what her husband's credentials were, but we had there were some renters on the
Right.
block
Yeah.
who were barely making it,
Yeah.
and they definitely did not have college
Yeah.
educations. But we had the gamut on that block. And that was another part of the stew that made the thing so fascinating and such a great way to come into this life and learn about different types of people. And the intimate knowledge of the people and being able going in and out of their homes and knowing their bird's name,
Right.
knowing their daughter, what school their daughter was at. And I'm a kid. I mean, a little kid.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about your experience, Willie, is how universal it was at that time. Small towns were that way. Suburbs were that way.
Mm-hmm.
Cities were that way.
Yeah.
And we shared a common culture that today has been lost. I mean, there's some advantages and disadvantages to that, but we were, as kids, we were all on the same page. And we all had the same heroes, we watched the same TV shows, had to sing the same songs, dress the same, acted the same to a certain degree.
And it was white. It was 100% white.
My block wasn't. My block was, like I said, I've done the research, so I know what it's like. On my street alone, which is a one-way street, which is one block long, one-way street, 363 people lived on the block. There were immigrants from 14 different countries, including outliers like Russia and Turkey. There were a fair smattering of black families who were living there. I don't know how, with what degree of harmony they lived there, but no one gave them any public grief. I know that. We didn't, certainly. And as kids, we gave everyone grief, and we didn't go out of our way to be mischievous towards black people. It wasn't perfect, but it was. There was a degree of harmony and community that's since been lost, and I know you're going to tell me why we lost it and the consequences of losing it. By the way, I just remember the name of Beaver Cleaver's hometown.
Springfield, was it?
Mayfield.
Mayfield.
Yeah. Not to be confused with Mayberry,
Right.
which is the quintessential small town. That's Mayberry RFD, where Sheriff Andy Taylor presided, and what may remain the best TV comedy ever made. But
the character development in the Andy Griffith Show was it was so realistic.
That's right.
I mean, these were characters.
Yes.
And they were older men that I'm sure I was like a fly on, like they wanted to swat me away, but they'd be sitting out in their in their lawn chairs.
Right.
And with their cigars and their tattoos or whatever from the war and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
I'd be hanging around, really curious. Well, one guy sold comic books. So he delivered comic books.
Right.
So I'd go see them. I'd bring in the paper.
Yeah.
He'd hand me a stack of comic books with the covers ripped off where they'd gotten the credit for them.
Oh,
and
sure,
then he'd
right,
throw them in the
right.
truck. The guy across the street sold marbles. I'd take the paper into him, and he'd give me marbles.
Right.
And these were, there were all kinds of characters, and your parents never worried about having to leave you alone or anything. They just say, go over to Mrs. Bell's house or
Right.
go to Mrs. And then they'd call up on the party line, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Did you have a party
Oh,
line?
sure. Yeah, right. Which was a source of unending frustration for the people on the other end of the party line, who I think got the bad end of the deal because there were more of us than there were of them.
Yeah, we had a party line with a wonderful, sweet neighbor on the next block behind us.
We had an irritable person who was always complaining.
But she was the biggest talker on the block.
Yeah.
And But that was another thing that I don't think a lot of people really even know what a party line is. But
No, not
you had
younger
to
people. Share with someone you didn't know.
So you'd have one ring would indicate that it was for you, and if it was a double ring, it was for the neighbor, or vice versa.
It was complicated. And we had another phenomenon. This is in New Jersey and the East in general. It's one of the few Dutch contributions to the English language, the American English language, and that is the word stoop, S-T-O-O-P.
No, I've heard stoop.
The stoop was the steps leading up to your house.
Oh, a stoop.
You're sitting on a
stoop.
stoop.
Sitting on the stoop.
Now, a lot of our houses didn't have porches. A few of them did, almost none. We didn't have a porch, but we had a stoop, and everyone had a stoop, right? And I was doing this research for my book, and I came across a picture of my father sitting on the milk box on the stoop on a spring day, right?
Nothing like it.
With the rollies rolled up in his shirt sleeve, right? And so it was
You like the bass boat? I got it with the coupons.
all right. Every clock, scale, radio in my house came courtesy of Raleigh cigarettes.
Raleigh coupons.
As did my mother's lung cancer, but that's another story for another
She
day.
had Bel Airs probably.
No, they were both Raleigh. They were brand loyalists to the core. I mean, I am too, but not quite like that. Not to the lethal level, but the stoop was everyone had a stoop.
Yeah.
So in the evening, especially, I remember such a nice memory. In the summer, in the spring, especially. When you're literally sprung from school, and it's pleasant out now, and everyone's out on their stoops.
We made ice cream on the stoop.
Yeah. And your neighbors, and we lived on a narrow street, so you could communicate with your neighbors across the street as well. Mm-hmm. And we didn't make ice cream. We had an ice cream man come down every night, Charlie.
Oh, yeah.
He was a black guy, had his own truck, and it was a major cultural event every evening in the spring and summer.
Oh, yeah, we had the little Jeeps with the ding, 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 and we'd wait.
Right.
I remember had my Mercury dimes and my Buffalo nickels. I'm not kidding, folks.
Right.
That's how elderly I am. But
I know we
7 cents for a twin pop, if I recall.
I know we sound like geezers here, but I think what's useful for the next generation is to understand what they've lost and what they could possibly regain. I know that community builders now are trying to imitate this style of living, and it's hard to imitate if you're not doing it organically or spontaneously.
That's the whole reason of talking about it, because you can't pick up that essence.
It's difficult
by making it a Potemkin neighborhood,
right? But it's nonetheless it had its.
But those new ones, I always say, like the shopping centers that look like a
I know.
Street. I go, if you have to drive to it, is it really a pedestrian area?
Exactly.
I mean, no.
No, if you can't walk to it. And since I've been familiarized myself with this whole world and doing my research, but in my neighborhood, which was largely Irish and Italian, overwhelmingly Catholic, the white portion, blacks tend to be Baptist or whatever. Mm-hmm. There were very few Jewish families. But one Jewish family produced 3 children. The oldest son, and he'd be over 100 now. He's obviously, a generation or two beyond me, was a doctor. And at that time, this is part of the community. Doctors maintain their practices in the neighborhood, often in the front office of their own home. This was not uncommon. This guy's name was Samuel Berg. And what he did was he took photographs of the entire neighborhood. 6,000 photographs. They're part of a collection now at the Newark Public Library. So I was able to go through these photos, and he took most of them were taken when I was about 10 or 12 years old. So it was perfect age to remember what the neighborhood was like. Mm-hmm. And able to go from one store to another store to another store, another store, another store. Neighborhood movie theater.
Yep.
We had 2 neighborhood movie theaters. All of this within walking distance, easy walking distance. I never had a bicycle. I didn't learn to ride a bike until I was 30, never needed to. By the way, it's not easy to learn how to ride a bike at 30. Having someone
You look so goofy with training wheels when you're 30.
Having someone push you down the street yelling, "Attaboy, Jack!"
Yeah,
it's not a way to build your self-esteem. But no, so he took all these pictures. And then I'm reading this, and I realize that he has a younger brother who lives in a neighborhood. And this is an emblematic story of the times. His younger brother, Morris Berg, goes on to become a catcher in the major leagues, which was unusual profession for a Jew to begin with, especially one who's gone to Princeton and Columbia Law School, is Morris Mo Berg. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he played for 18 years in the majors. Brilliant guy, smartest guy in Major League Baseball.
I would imagine.
And he wasn't a star, but everyone wanted him on the team because he's a good teammate, good backup mostly. World War II comes. He gets drafted by the OSS, and he becomes a spy. There's been a movie made about his life. Several books have been written, Mo Berg. And then he comes back to the neighborhood, like so many veterans after World War II, unfortunately, has a breakdown, basically. And, after this he was recruiting nuclear physicists in Italy and Austria during the war, and then he comes back and he's living now with his doctor brother, and he wanders the neighborhood, and at the end he's getting mugged just like everyone else. So there's a sadness to the story. But Samuel Berg's photo collection, it was just amazing. As I'm looking at each of these photos, I remembered what I did at each of these shops. So, for instance, there was, I think the guy's name was Tutera. He was the shoemaker, right? They always had an Italian shoemaker, and Italian barbers, Italian shoemakers. And we'd go to him and ask for leftover heels so we could play hopscotch. And we played the most ruthless game of hopscotch any boys in America were playing. We played killer hopscotch games, but you had to have a heel of a shoe. And we had a painted court. And when I'd see people playing with like a rock, it just seemed so counterfeit. The whole enterprise didn't even seem worth pursuing. But
so the proper thing is the heel of a shoe?
Yeah.
On hopscotch?
Right, because it sticks, It doesn't roll or whatever. Unless if you throw it right, it'll land flat. Next to there was a Chinese laundry. Chinese laundromat. And I used to go there because I was really deeply in love with, it was like, love is a many splendor thing with the 12-year-old daughter of the Chinese. So I'd go, my mother's saying, why are you getting your shirts done at the Chinese laundry? And I couldn't bring myself to tell her, But
You're 12.
I'm 12, right? It wasn't even unrequited. It could have been requited, except that I had absolutely no idea what to do with this relationship, And it wasn't taboo. I mean, they were making movies that the Asian white male, Asian female was never taboo. No, I mean
It's always worked for me.
Yeah, it's always oddly it is the thing at places like Harvard, where all these smart Jewish guys have Asian girlfriends because they can keep up with them, and they're all ambitious and they want to get ahead. But
the relationship with merchants,
yes,
with service providers,
and you knew them all by their first name,
was much, much different. It was so close. It was familial
because they were all proprietors.
And the doctor would make house calls to the kids.
Yeah,
I remember Dr. Davis, and everybody knew Dr. Davis, and he would come make house calls.
Right.
And again, we didn't have that. We didn't treat a automobile transportation as though it were some kind of free entitlement that we just willy-nilly would take at any time we needed a light bulb or something. That was a special thing. It's like when Dad gets home, Mom's got and
because it was gone all day.
Yeah,
right.
And so everybody had to provide this service to be there, and as a result, the interpersonal relationships with the shopkeeper. I mean, we had in Fairway, we had about a third of a mile away, there was a little grocery store.
Right.
And then there was a barber shop.
Yeah.
With all that implies, where everybody went to get their haircut.
Right.
Everybody knew the barber. And then there was a
Floyd the barber.
Full-service gas station where Goober worked.
Yeah, right.
And it was full service with service bays.
Right.
And they pumped your gas, and it was a Sinclair station, and it was inexpensive relatively. And then you'd go to the wider, perimeter, which was almost a mile away. But you could go to two different places, and there were two movie theaters. There were supermarkets.
Right.
There were drugstores, everything imaginable, but you'd have to walk almost a mile. You know?
Yeah.
But so we had, and these were all independent or local chains.
Right.
So, yeah, you could sign the back of the ticket. A 5-year-old would go in and get the hamburger and the vegetables and sign the back of the ticket and take it home. And so everybody's walking.
Yeah.
The swimming pool was small. I don't know. There aren't any more people, I don't think, in Fairway now than there were. But now the pool is monumental.
I liked your pool, by the way. I've used it many times. I used to use it until I stopped swimming about 10 years ago. Partly because it was pretty anarchic, oddly. I mean, it remained that way, unlike a lot of suburban pools.
How's that?
Like, for instance, when my daughters were small and they had a kiddie pool, and like on a hot day, I'd take my chair and put it right in the kiddie pool, and no one said anything.
Good.
At Prairie Village, I mean, these are Kansas City suburbs. Prairie Village, it was like going to.
Yeah.
You can imagine if.
That was a process.
If Colonel Klink was running this, the Prairie Village pool had more levels of scrutiny and showering, like forced. I don't want to make a Holocaust reference here, but yeah, it was kind of like, not like a Holocaust, but that level of scrutiny and cleanliness and urgency.
Yeah, Fairway is like the only thing was quit running.
Yeah, right.
Quit running.
Now the, and I could go on forever talking about, in fact, when I first posted on my Facebook page, I was writing this book, I got this incredible outpouring of people who lived and grew up in my neighborhood when I did, or even after I did, who just enthused about how much they loved that neighborhood, a neighborhood that today you wouldn't even want to drive through. It's that bad. And it was that way by 1975. I mean, it had collapsed overnight. In my case, a highway came and took my house. I mean, it was pretty dramatic and pretty brutal. But a lot of these neighborhoods eroded. They didn't explode like mine did. And what do you see is what happened, Loy? Why did we lose that natural sense of community?
So many things happen.
Yeah.
At the same time. One of the things that I was just thinking about was, if you think about what our media was,
right, when
we were in these small towns.
Right.
Now, where I was, we had the Sun, the Squire, the Herald, the Star, the Times, the Shopper, the Wednesday magazine.
Right.
These were all print publications that would come out and we'd all
share the information.
Information. We'd read. We didn't all just tune in the headphones and do. So that's one of the things that took people kind of away and gave everybody this external locus of control, which is this mass media thing.
Yeah.
That happened.
By the way, I used to deliver newspapers, and in my case, Newark Evening News, Newark Star Ledger. And that was, to your point, I was in everyone's house. Mm-hmm. I knew everyone who lived everywhere. I'd been in their homes when I went to collect. You went to collect individually. We didn't have thrown newspapers. I walked them around, basically.
Yeah. And so it was just another level of connection. So,
but I read the paper from, even as a kid, I read the paper.
Oh,
we all did,
Yeah. And there were comics.
We fight over those, sports section.
But, how did it happen? I mean, technology was the biggest driver.
Yeah.
Television, air conditioning.
Yeah.
All of it's closing people up. The garage door goes down. People are in. That's it. Then the whole push toward getting women out of the house, and the equal or the kind of moral relativism that happens when divorce was a huge factor in this. Now, I went back to my old neighborhood about when during one of the elections, when Obama was running, and I noticed Fairway was just filled with Obama signs, and that really kind of fascinated me because it showed the evolution from a traditional
Eisenhower Republican neighborhood
to predominantly Democrat with Obama. I mean, supporting him to the point that you've got the yard signs up.
Right.
And I was walking down the street, and there was a guy out washing his car. And I said, hey, I noticed it seems like there are so many Obama signs in the neighborhood. I says, this must be a really strongly Democrat neighborhood. And the guy went off on me. He immediately goes, well, there are a lot of single women and mothers and teachers who live here, and they're really hurting.
Of course they are.
And I was like, okay, sorry.
Sorry to step on that toe.
And of course, they're really hurting, and Fairway is still a very expensive place.
I know. You don't hurt very badly.
It's outrageously expensive for what it is.
Right.
A little cracker box that costs, $40,000.
But well-located cracker box.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. What do you think, Jack? I mean,
well, I know you mentioned some of them, and here's one, a big one. When I moved to Kansas City, I guess 40-something years ago, my first qualification, I had two. One is that I wanted to live within walking distance of the university, UMKC, because my wife was a professor there, and I didn't want to have to depend. I didn't want to need two cars. Plus, I was teaching as an adjunct. I liked the idea of being able to walk to work or to take a bike to work.
Sure.
Because I lived in a university town for 5 years before that, and it was still that kind of town, right? And then the other thing I insisted when we bought a house, and I bought a house the second day I was in Kansas City. I mean, that's how much I'd never been to this city before. Day two, I bought a house. So I ended up in Brookside because I was within walking distance of the university. The other thing I insisted on was a front porch, because front porches are critical to maintaining the level of community you were talking about. And
not some stoop.
No, stoops can do it. But a front porch is even better because you can invite people on your
front.
You got a swing, and you can,
that's nice.
You can drink lemonade and whatnot.
I've had lemonade there.
But that's part of it. But here is a couple of things broke it down, Loy, and they didn't have to happen. After about 1950, suburban developers took away the front porch.
Yeah. Well, there again, you go with air conditioning and all that stuff.
But even it preceded air conditioning.
Really?
Yeah, not by much, but a little bit.
Because we had a side porch that was screened in.
Yeah.
That was nice.
But a side porch doesn't serve the same function as a front porch. And a back porch doesn't serve that function at all.
No.
And it pulls you away from the community. And I would drive through these suburban neighborhoods when I was looking to buy a home and saying, how do these people don't communicate? You don't know your neighbors if you're never out front, other than by accident, or you're raking leaves, but you don't even do that anymore.
You're not burning them. I know that. That used to be another community thing.
A total community thing, and it was a wonderful experience. Wonderful smell.
And that smell still takes every old timer like you or me back to that moment.
And we've replaced that smell with leaf blowers, which are utterly obnoxious. I mean, you can hear them 2 blocks away, and it really disturbs whatever autumnal quietude there might be.
Well, burning leaves is terrible. You need to take a machine, a gas-powered machine, and you need to blow them all into plastic containers.
Right.
Wrap those damn leaves up and take them to a dump and get rid of them.
Right.
In a truck.
Right.
Get them out of here. Those are toxic.
Whereas burning leaves, the most wonderful smell of your childhood.
If you've never smelled burning leaves.
Proustian smell, transports you immediately back to an autumn afternoon when you're always happy.
Yeah, and you jumped in them until you're sick of it.
Well, before they started burning them.
Before, if you were really bold, you jumped in while they were burning. But you and the dog and everybody jumped in them, and you rake them back up again, and then the burning happened. And that was the big fun.
So you're right about technology changing things. First, but you take away the front porch. That didn't have to happen.
You're right.
In fact, my sister, who lives in a town...
Brookside's a great front porch area.
It is. It's a great throwback area. And my street, when my kids were little, was perfect, because our side street there is very narrow. So you communicate with the people across the street. The kids could actually run across the street. They get spanked a little bit in the beginning, but until they grow up. But we communicated both sides. There was bunches of little kids. It was like living a generation earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing, especially in areas like Kansas City that are hot in the summer, or any place in the South, is Central Air. Central Air pulled people totally inside.
Oh, yeah. And then cable television kept them there.
Right, because they could be endlessly diverted with something or another. And then for boys and kids in general, especially boys, computer games.
Well, that's a lot later. I mean, first thing that happened was they all got cars.
Yeah, that too, right?
I mean, you had a 4-car family now, where it was a 1-car family. Ain't no kid 16 years old with a driver's license going to hang out with the old folks and sit around and watch the Jackie Gleason show or the Ed Sullivan. They're out, man.
Right.
That's a place where you can drink beer.
Yeah. No, it's true. In fact, it's kind of involved to go into here, but in my book, I tell the story of how, as a 16-year-old, I came in contact with the new suburban America, and I was at a total loss.
Really?
Well, I was too young to drive, for starters, and a place where
you couldn't drive at 16?
Not in New Jersey, you had to be 17.
Really?
Yeah. In New York City, I went to high school, you had to be 18. So I was living in New Jersey and going to school in New York. I was relatively advanced in that regard. But in an area, in a newly suburbanized area, these were exiles from Newark went to live because they couldn't afford to live in the more communal built-in suburbs around Newark. It was just strip malls, automobiles, and that kind of heartless culture. And if I didn't know how to ride a bike and I didn't have a car, it's hard to go courting, at that with those kind of disadvantages. But it was and made me yearn for the neighborhood that I grew up in, which was, by the time I was 16, was no longer viable. They took my house.
So you were like an old timer when you were 17. I miss the olden days.
I was a fogey at 17, right?
Holy
I was
cow.
yearning for the days gone by, literally. I mean, and so, for instance, when I met my wife in graduate school and I went back to her small town, which was still functioning like Mayberry or Mayfield or anything, I just marveled at the continuity of it all, the community of it all. Because when I went back by this time, now we're talking 1970, back to Newark, it was gone. My neighborhood was unlivable, untenable, like the title of my book. You couldn't stay there. So for instance, when I was doing research on the book, I met with a bunch of friends who I'd grown up with, and we met at the place most convenient for where they all ended up living, which was 55 miles from Newark, down the Jersey Shore, inland, not on the beach, inland in the Pine Barrens. And I asked my one friend, who's a Democrat, the one remaining Democrat that I know from that world, because that transformation process turned Democrats into Republicans, why he finally moved. He was living with his widowed mother. It's about 1970 now. The first blacks moved onto our block in 1950. It wasn't like people upped and fled. They didn't. And he said, and then he gave me the title of the book. He didn't know it at the time. He said it became untenable. And I said, what does untenable mean? He goes, well, when your mother gets mugged for the second time, that's untenable. He said, when your home gets invaded for the second time, that's untenable, right? So no matter what your intentions were, the neighborhood had become untenable. Now, my neighborhood I can't generalize from that experience beyond other northeastern cities and north central cities. But in small towns, and I've had experience with small towns since then, and in suburbs like your own, there was no external force causing these cities to break down, these communities to break down. You could at least speak about the problems you were facing. We couldn't. We were silenced about the nature of the problem we encountered. And so I go to small towns now, and let's face it, every small town in the Midwest is suffering unless they're close to a big city or have a university in them. They've lost that heartbeat that they used to have. And it's not because, in those cases, it's because they've simply outlived their commercial viability.
Wars and things like that have pulled people out of small town. That there were giant events that helped suck a lot of
right. But there's also technological changes. The introduction of the tractor, for instance, de-peopled rural America. You used to need something like 16 people for every one person you need now on a farm to to operate it. That was a big part of it. And so it wasn't a negative process. Plus, you had cars and good roads. So if you're living in a place like a place I know well, which is Garnett, Kansas, small town, county seat, about 70 miles from here, what do? Do you go to your local crummy little store, or do you drive 20 minutes and go to a Walmart in a nearby town and get whatever you need? So a lot of it was a trade-off.
A lot of us are obsolete farm equipment. Is that what you're saying?
We are that. We might as well be the old mule that no one needs anymore, you know. But nonetheless, it's an interesting opportunity to reflect on change, and you're right, Lloyd. The universal part of our childhoods of the baby boomer America was that sense of community that's been frayed, and some people still have it in pieces, and other people have reconstructed it nicely in some places. I know places where it's little has changed in all that period, but for the most part, I think our children and grandchildren are poorer for the absence of it.
And this tin horn, it takes a village, this phony cityscape type development, all this stuff, it doesn't come close to what the reality on the ground was in the 1950s and 60s.
It has to be organic.
It does.
And we've lost that, and yet
chain store, everything is the local merchants are gone.
Right.
And that was a true human connection that you had with them.
Right.
And I mean, there were times when people fell on hard times. Those merchants would step up and
they would
afford them.
And they would,
And the house calls and the whole deal. That ain't going to happen.
Not again. And you know, it's just one of those things that have come and gone, and you just have to get used to the absence of it. You know, but and count your blessings, because let's face it, we still live in the most bountiful place in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
And to complain about our lives is a little bit whiny, you know. But
we're whining.
You know, I tell you what. Next week we'll talk about the whininess, the contemporary whininess of America, and what we can do to reverse that. Because I think that is reversible, you know. But for now, I just want to say, hey, thanks. That was an excellent idea, Lloyd. Thanks for sharing your memories here with the rest of the world. And we will be back.
I'm just a block dog, Jack. I'm just a block dog.
Looking for his master.
Looking for my next bone.
Well, we'll see if we can throw you one here on Upstream with Cashill and Edge.
See you later.